All right, continuation of the ideal classes, everything for the ideal party. So I've gone over the barbarian and the paladin. Now it's time to get into like your ranged attackers or whatever. So uh, I'm getting into the ranger. So now the reason why I picked the ranger for like the ideal party and everything is so because with the paladin and the barbarian you now have two frontline fighters in combat and everything. So the barbarian can wade in and cause massive damage, like for his like typical axe, and he can sit there like it's like basically like a Hulk smash type of deal. The paladin is perfectly backing him up and everything as everyone's trying to like oh my god, there's this raging barbarian, and he's coming in and start picking off people with his like sword and shield type of deal. The ranger, think of like the I'm coming at this from the concept of like the archer. So like quite possibly could take like the prestige class like from third edition arcane archer, but like focus heavily on archery. So it doesn't have to necessarily be arcane archer. You could take subclasses and stuff that lets you focus in on archery. So while those two are like in a sense wading into combat, anybody that is going to try to flank them, he can pull out his bow and start, in a sense, sniping and picking people off that are going to flank and everything. So, and also, it gives the rogue the ability to flank himself as well and everything. So, I think like one of the perfect examples that I can come up off the top of my head would be like Legolas from Lord of the Rings, and like in the movies you see him doing all these fancy tricks and like of archery and like picking off people like left and right like it's no big deal. So think of like that like in combat situations. Now, when it comes to abilities, you are going to want to focus heavily on dexterity to be able to be that proficient archer and everything. So you might not necessarily need high intelligence or wisdom. Like I mean, being like a spellcaster, you might want to dump some into wisdom so that way like you can like cast spells at a higher level. Charisma is one of those things where you probably not you could probably put that on like the back burner. Uh, but for like primary abilities, I would say dexterity. Have a decent amount of wisdom, maybe like a 12 to 14 or so, but primarily concentrate on dexterity, like strength and constitution. You might be get away with like slightly lower, so maybe like a 12 for to 14 for both of them would be perfect. So like a 12 strength, maybe like an 18 dex, 12 constitution. Yeah, like you could probably get away with like a 10, 8 to 10 intelligence, 8 to 10 charisma, and quite possibly do 12 to 14 for wisdom. So that way, like they like again, so they can concentrate on like pretty much the archery. And like I said, in the combat situation, when the two barbarian and paladin are wading into melee combat, they can the ranger can step back and start sniping people with his bow that of opponents that are going to try and flank those two and everything. So now in non-combat encounters or like in like non-combat role where the ranger would actually like excel would be like as like a scout, sort of like the rogue. So he could team up with the rogue and go out ahead and scout out like and then come back like, oh hey, look, we've got a group of bandits and like a tower or something coming up and everything. So like, you want to instead of keep going down this road, you want to bank around. So like this is a way that like the ranger could excel is be like that scout in like a wilderness environment. So like he could take the lead and kind of like bring the rogue on as like a sidekick, and like he could also be like the guide, like like someone who's wilderness based. Like I said, scouting ahead. He could also lead the group. Like, oh hey, look, I've been through this like forest of like. Before like oh I've been through Mirkwood Forest up and down like left and right, and I know the whole all the trails and everything. So he could be in a sense like a guide for the group. Like, oh hey, look, I've been here. I know this trail that we can take. That's like it's going to shave off a day of travel, and we can get to our destination and like maybe defeat the evil wizard. That's the big bad evil guy or whatever. Get to his stronghold before like he does, or maybe surprise him by getting there a lot earlier than he was expecting or whatever. And so that's another way that the ranger could excel in non-combat encounters and everything. So this is pretty much why I'm going like with the ranger as kind of like the third kind of third play or character or PC or whatever. So I've gone over the two melee ones now. Like the ranger's the first, in a sense, ranged character. The next one will be the rogue. So the rogue, of course, would be kind of complementary with the ranger. Like I said, with like being a scout, and of course, in wilderness settings, the ranger could take the lead in scouting and being able to lead the group through any wilderness, like going through like the forest example that I used. The rogue can kind of come along as like a sidekick and kind of act as like a second pair of hands and kind of like being able to kind of second pair of eyes as well and everything. So that, and of course the roles would be kind of flipped in an urban setting. So like the rogue might be like more it has have more connections like maybe the thieves guild. So like an urban setting, the two roles could be flipped. The rogue could then turn around and hey, look, I need someone to watch my back and everything, and like I could bring the ranger, knowing that he can handle himself, like in like being like I said, having dexterity as like a primary ability. If things went astray and like they couldn't the rogue couldn't necessarily talk his way out of something, he could grab the ranger and be like, okay, we need to make a quick exit, and like they go across the rooftops or whatever, and like the ranger would be able to keep up and everything, and not have like a better chance at not failing like a saving throw and or a dexterity based ability check of, like I said, jumping from rooftop to rooftop and everything. And so, of course, using that kind of concept, you could also flip it into like the realm of wilderness, where like the ranger can sit there, tie like a rope to like an arrow, shoot it up to a tree, and maybe quite possibly use that concept to swing from tree to tree, like Tarzan or whatever. And it could do like something surprising like that, or like you come across maybe like a gorge or ravine that's not necessarily like tens or hundreds of feet that would be impassable. It's maybe something that's like would be kind of like a challenge to jump across. Maybe like it's 10 feet across. Use that concept where he ties a rope off to an arrow and shoots it across the gorge or whatever, or like the small ravine, and like it uses dexterity base to be able to, like in a sense, like create like a pulley system or like a zip line type of deal. So this is where his dexterity ability would come in handy again in a non-combat role. So now with like and of course with like spellcasters, like the cleric and wizard being able to hang it out in the back as well to be able to cast their spells, he could also act as like kind of like a guard to those two to be able to cover. So like the flanking that I mentioned, like if people are like the opponents are trying to flank the barbarian and paladin, if that's not necessarily happened, but they're trying to come after the spellcasters, and I'm like, oh hey, these two are like more of a threat. You can start picking off the people that are coming towards the spellcasters, and quite possibly, if there's someone that comes out of nowhere as a surprise, the wizard and the cleric would have someone who has like a decent combat ability. So like maybe like as a backup weapon, the ranger has like a rapier or a scimitar or something that he could use like a finesse type of skill to, instead of like using strength as a attack bonus with like a sword like the barbarian and paladin would do, he could use dexterity based, like I said, the rapier or scimitar or something that he could be more finesse with, and to be able to guard the spellcasters, to be able to let the cleric cast healing on like the barbarian and paladin, and quite possibly the rest of the group, and let the wizard cast his offensive spells like magic missile or Mel's acid arrow or something, on top of being able to cast his defensive spells. Maybe he casts mage armor on someone like the barbarian. It would give him enough time to be able to do that, or he could quite possibly cast haste on like one of the characters to let them move faster around the combat scenario. And of course that's like in the combat scenario. So like and of course I went over the non-combat scenarios with like wilderness and urban. So now you're starting to see how getting all these more character classes with these different skills, where each one can shine like in a different type of environment. So like the ranger would like shine in a role as like a guide through the wilderness, and as like also as a scout, bringing the rogue along as like a sidekick, like in wilderness environments and everything. So this is the third of like six classes that I'm going to be doing for the ideal party. So now up next I'll be getting the rogue, and then I'll finally be getting into like this two spellcasters of the cleric and the wizard.